Friends, I'm going to ask you a special favor, and I know this favor I'm going to ask has the potential of halving the audience, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I'd like to invite you to come closer. What we're going to deal with this afternoon is far more intimate. And I know it is safe to sit far away, but I really appreciate. Thank you so much. This afternoon, what I would like to do is primarily focus on the words of the Apostle Paul in the book of Ephesians, chapter 5. Where Paul actually talks about the responsibility of a husband to love his wife, and then the responsibility of a wife to show respect to her husband. And I would like to introduce you to a book called Love and Respect by Dr. Enrichment, which actually puts out those primary points that I'm going to bring out. So I give acknowledgement to him for his work, and I'm going to just put a warning out there for you, because I'm first going to speak to the husbands about what is the formula of showing love to your wife, and then I want to take the time to talk to the wives. Biblically, what does it mean to show respect? Now, the Christian church, even including the Seventh-day Adventist Church, has done a lot over the many, many years of telling husbands how to show love to their wives. But we as a church have neglected to talk to the wives of how to show respect to their husbands. And today what we see is that most of the leadership in the churches are being conducted by ladies. We see a lot of men had disappeared out of the church. And the question that we need to ask, have we as a church in actual fact neglected in guiding women or ladies to actually demonstrate love to their husbands in a way that is articulated in a language that a husband understands? I've had the privilege of speaking to the African Forum. I am African myself. You scratch my skin and you'll see that it comes out. I grew up amongst the Zulu people, the largest tribe in Southern Africa, the Zulu tribe. That's my second language. I'm actually speaking to you out of my third language. And culturally, they have a different way in which they, the hierarchy in relationships. And when I was invited a few years back to Melbourne to be the guest speaker at the African Forum on relationships, I decided I'm going to try out, because I believe that God is in actual fact the God of all nations. And when he created relationships, he has created us all with exactly the same desires. And I asked my audience this question: are you first and foremost African, or are you first and foremost Christian? Because their answer to that question will define how they will react and respond in marriage. And what I'm going to present to you this afternoon, I presented to them, and I asked their wives or the husbands first, to come and sit at the front. I told the wives they were not allowed to take notes, because our human nature is that when someone talks to the husband about his responsibility to show love to his wife, if the wife sits there taking notes, she's going to go home and wait for her husband to go through the tick box list. And if he doesn't do it, or if he skips one, our human nature is that I'm not going to do my part, not before the other one is fulfilled. And then I swapped them around. asked the wives to come and sit, and the husbands were not allowed to take notes. And I checked with the wives, checked with the men as I dealt with, and asked them, am I on track on what I'm presenting? And there was a chorus especially coming from the wives when I spoke to the husbands about how to show love. But when it came to speaking to the wives about how to show respect to the husbands, the reaction with the males was different. Strong men were weeping. I ran the program in Papua New Guinea at our university, had the privilege of traveling to PNG. And before I went, my first time there, my assignment was to prepare the university staff for the academical year. And I spoke to some of my colleagues that have been working in PNG for some time and said, look, this is what I'm going to try and do. And they said, don't. Culturally, it won't fit. And if you say to me, don't do something, that's quite often, a red flag. I go and do it because of my belief system that God has designed all of humanity out of exactly the same cloth. And I was astounded. The Deputy Chancellor invited me to his home to have lunch with him and his wife. And he said to me, not once have we ever heard what you presented. And the rest of the staff are saying what he's speaking about is spot on. Friends, it's not because of me. It is because of what I'm going to share with you is biblical. And I think it's time that we move away from the humanistic advice that is given on marriage, and we go back to the designer of marriage and ask him, how should marriage, how should love, how should respect be administered in a marriage? I stand the danger of never to be invited back, Pastor Zeni, especially by the ladies in the audience. But I want to say to you, ladies and gentlemen, that I've got no agenda other than seeing Adventist marriages flourish. That's my only agenda. I'm married to a wife, the only one that I've ever had, and I still love her. I've got a daughter and a daughter-in-law that I view as my daughter as well. And I've got 5 little granddaughters. All of them are female, and the agenda that I have is for them in their marriage also to be a successful marriage. So hear me out if you don't mind, and happy for you to box me afterwards. So my slides have been changed a little bit due to the fact that I've swapped over from Keynote to PowerPoint. So I've just taken you'll just see the whole slide full of writing. Forgive me in that. The first point where I want to go is Ephesians chapter 5, but verse 1 and verse 2. We normally go to husbands, love your wives, right? Jumping down to verse 26 through to 31. But we should actually read the preamble, which says, therefore, be imitators of God as dear children, and walk in love as Christ also has loved us and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma. God is in actual fact asking us, the preamble is there for both male and female. The preamble, God is actually inviting us to be a living sacrifice, one that will act as a sweet-smelling aroma. What does that mean? It means that when the world and our children look at our marriages, that they will in actual fact be drawn to the Jesus that is reflected through our marriage. There is no greater evidence of God at work when Christian couples actually live intentionally looking for harmony and unity and love. I so often, when there's a marital crisis that I'm dealing with, that I asked the couple, I said to them, "You're a committed Christian, am I right?" "Yes, I am a committed Christian." I say, "Right, are you willing to die for your faith, for your God?" And they say, "Of course, I'm willing to die for God." Okay, that's good. So let me ask you another question. Are you willing to live sacrificially for Him with nothing in it for you? A couple of things a little bit deeper now. Friends, I worked for 10 years in the Sydney region working with people that no one else wants to work with. People in the drug field, people with criminality, people that some church leaders, division leaders had screamed at me and said, "Why do you ever take the church into areas where no one else can make a success?" My response to them was, because that is where God's power is demonstrated so much the better. Our God has the ability of transforming lives where no one else can transform lives. And in my own conference, there is today a colleague of mine, a minister of faith, that used to be one of my clients, coming out of a world of criminology, that have completely transformed his life because not of me, but because of God. And today is working, doing a phenomenal ministry. But as I worked for those 10 years in that field, my first two months, 42 drug-related murders took place around us. It was a field where I, for a period of 2 years, would say goodbye to my family in the morning, holding them tight, and would be emotional. I never shared with my wife and my kids the reason why I was emotional, but for a period of 2 years, I was saying goodbye to them, having no assurance that I would come home alive that night. There was nothing in it for me. But I stayed and maintained that work because of my commitment to God. So my question to married couples, are you willing to do that for God? And normally they would say yes. I've got one last question for them. Would you be willing to stay loving, caring, committing in a marriage where there's nothing in it for you, purely because God is asking you to stay there and continue, keep on investing in that marriage for His honor and His glory? And the couple steps back and says, this is now too much. But that is in reality what that preamble is asking. To, in actual fact, commit because of your commitment to God, to commit into a marriage. Not because there's something in it for you, but because you have made a commitment to God. The problem is that most marriages today operate on, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. I'll do my part of the list that David's going to give us today, as long as there's evidence that you will do your part. And that is where most marriages fail. Because as we said this morning, friends, each one of us enter into a marriage with brokenness. Each one of us actually has some pathology that we bring that comes from our previous life. We bring it into marriage, and that's going to trip us up if our focus is not on a commitment to God. Let me tell you about my wife and myself. As I said a few times already, been married for over 40 years. There has been times in our marriage where we just shook their head and said, "Why are we still together?" Where divorce is not an option, but murder, most probably. Not really, but you get the point I'm trying to make. But it's that commitment to God that saw us through. And it's because of that commitment that I want to talk to you as gentlemen first and foremost, before I speak to the ladies and read the rest. He says, husbands, love your wives. Not multiple wives, just one wife per husband. Just as Christ also loved the church. So your example is not to love your wife because she is loving you to the same degree back as what you have loved her with, but rather as Christ actually loved the church and he gave himself. What does that mean? You'll see it nowhere that God is asking that from the wife. God is asking for us as males, because of our commitment to God, to enter into a loving relationship with our wives. The Greek word that is used there is agapatu, which is in actual fact an unselfish, higher order love where I give and I commit with no expectation in return. That is the kind of love with which God loves us and the church, and is willing and had done it to give himself up by dying on a cross. Nowhere does God ask the wife to commit to that level. So friends, ladies, you're going to later hear some of the deep desires of a man's heart, which is linked to this. And I want you to put aside, ladies and gentlemen, put aside your political idea and orientation and understanding of hierarchy and headship and all of that. Let's allow the Bible to define it for us this afternoon. Because if we look through the lenses of the current feministic political perspective, we're going to lose it, because some of the wording that Peter used just politically is not okay. But Peter is not writing from a political perspective. He's inspired by the Holy Spirit. He's inspired by him, who is the designer of marriage. And I will try to unpack that for you. He further says, so husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bone. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Nowhere does the Bible ask the wife to leave the parents, right? Because it's written in a biblical context where the wife very publicly had already left her family home. So the issue is not with a wife having to leave her parents. She's done that. It's asking the husband to also leave his family home. Because in the biblical context, what would happen when a husband would go to, he would talk to his parents would go and talk to his future in-laws, and asked for the hand of his bride, and they will then have a public moving from her home, her parents, her family, after he has built a home on his family's estate, would move her with the entire family across. They will have a very public marriage ceremony that often would last for an entire week. A public demonstration of her leaving her family, now merging with his family. And after the public demonstration is over and done, they would move in together in the home that he has built right next to his parents. Her family goes home. There's separation on her side. The challenge now is that he needs to separate and solely focus on his wife. The sad thing is that the parents do not always realize that it is part of a response on their part also to cut the ties. That instruction is not just given to the couple, it's given also to the parents of those couples, of that couple, that they also need to cut the tie. My daughter-in-law has the right to know that if our son comes to us and says, Mum and Dad, there's some thoughts that I had, I'd like to just float something past you guys. I'm planning this or that, in my life. Our first question that we would ask our son is this: have you spoken to your wife about this? If the answer is no, we will say to him in a very loving, caring way, Son, you're married. Not before you've spoken to your wife about this will we allow you to talk to us. Our daughter-in-law has the right to know that we honor her not just as a daughter-in-law, but as a daughter in our home, and that we as her in-laws will protect their marriage even from our influence. My parents didn't understand that. My father would regularly want to take me aside and, just me and him discuss things about things that actually should belong in my marital life with my wife. And it caused major pain. And the most difficult thing, growing up in a home where when Dad says jump, your question was not why, the question was how high, Dad? Growing up in that home where you were never given permission to speak or to question what your father says, now to have to make a decision and say, Dad, I'm sorry, this is a decision that needs to be taken between my wife and myself. Please step aside. It was very difficult, very painful, but friends, it had to be done. Ephesians 5 verse 33 says, nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love, agapatu, his own wife as himself. That is the instruction that God gives. And this is not an option. It is not a love. The agapatu is the word to love your wife. We miss it in the English language because the Greek language is rich in it. I actually had it on my original slide, but switching it over to PowerPoint just destroyed it, so I just wiped it out. It actually means that it is an intentional, willful, higher order love with nothing in it for myself. It is solely focused on my spouse. Now, ladies, what would happen if your husband actually would love you with that kind of love? Who would love that? Hands up, ladies. I see a few hands are brave, but then again I see others looking at the husbands, not sure whether they are allowed to put up their hands. Hey? I should actually ask the men to sit in the front, the ladies at the back, and you can show me, and cheer me on. Oh, there it is. Agape, pure, willful, sacrificial love that intentionally desires another's highest good. That is the meaning. So what trips us up is the crazy cycle. When a husband neglects to show love to his wife, how does the wife react? She reacts by neglecting to show respect to him. And friends, that brings about the crazy cycle that so many marriages are caught up in today. Waiting for the other to actually demonstrate what we need. The energizing cycle, though, on the other hand, is that when a husband is intentional in loving his wife, what happens with her? She becomes intentional in showing respect. I'm talking to the husbands now because it works vice versa. When the wife neglects to show respect to her husband, how does he respond? By neglecting to show love to his wife. And each one is waiting for the other. But when the husband actually becomes, the wife becomes intentional to show love to her husband, how does he react? In a Christian home where two people are well-meaning, intending to have a happy marriage, if one would have the maturity, please note my words, if one would be willing to have the maturity to be intentional in showing their love or their respect to the other, no matter what is coming back to them, you will find that a transformation in time will happen in your marriage. I've discovered that in my marriage, sometimes the key to resolving a conflict, even if I'm guilty only of 2% in that conflict, if I'm willing to actually say, honey, I'm so sorry, the way that I reacted there was wrong. Will you please forgive me? Without making reference to the 2%. 100% take responsibility for the part that I'm guilty of. I have found that she is more than happy and willing to respond reciprocally to say, I'm actually also sorry for what I've done. And often it might come, actually, I was more guilty than what you are. Thank you for the courage of taking that first step. The question is, this afternoon, are you mature enough to take that first step, to start that process? Now, you're going to notice that I'm going to play very much on the words love versus respect, and there's a reason. And normally, this program, I present 6 presentations. You only get 3 presentations because you didn't want to come to Camp Somerset. So that's your punishment for it. What I neglect to share with you, over 8,000 men were asked the question, would you prefer that your wife love you while not respecting you, or would you prefer that your wife respects you while not loving you? 83% of the men actually responded and said the latter, that they would choose, that they would rather want their wives to show respect to them while not loving them, which brought the researchers to the conclusion that the way that a husband understands his wife loving him is not through the normal love that we talk about as a Christian church, but rather through the respect that she demonstrates to him. And I'll give you ladies the formula just now. There's a bit of problem there. So gentlemen, the formula for husbands to love their wives, and the wives will have to confirm whether this is true, is spelled couples. It stands for closeness, openness, understanding, peacemaking, loyalty, and esteem. I'm going to quickly go through that very briefly with you, and Don't read ahead of me, because it's easy to read ahead. That's what I found wives wanting to do. They want to know what's going to follow. But I'm talking here to the men. Your wife wants your closeness. She wants you to be close to her. She wants not just physical closeness. She wants to know that she belongs to you, and she's the only one for you. Am I right, ladies? Now, the Bible says in Genesis 2, verse 24, it says, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." That one flesh is far more than just the sexual side. I was speaking at a big camp one year, and the announcement was made that I was going to talk about marital intimacy. And the guy at the sound desk in the big tent couldn't help himself. He just blurted out for everyone to hear. He says, "Yay, David's going to talk about sex." And his wife that was sitting next to him gave him in the ribs. I said to him, "He's not talking about sex, stupid. Intimacy is far more than just the physical part." And friends, there is a problem in translation between males and females on this issue. Because what our wives want is far more than just the physical intimacy. They want to experience and know that she is the most important person in your life. To cling, to keep close, join together face to face, becoming one flesh. It is also emotional and spiritual. Your wife will feel loved when you move towards her and let her know you want to be close with a look, a touch, a smile. On my way here this morning, my wife is in Melbourne at the moment. A phone call has already been made to her. And while I was driving, I was chatting. What was the intent of it? To see whether she's healthy and doing okay, or just to hear her voice? There's sometimes just connections made during the day. I just miss my wife. I just want to hear her voice. There's nothing much to say other than, yep, things are okay. But you know what? It's time for you to come home. You've been away for over a week. I can cook for myself. I can wash my own dishes. I don't need a wife for that. Spent some time in the military where I was taught all of those things. But what I miss is that closeness. And therefore, when I'm finished with my work at the end of the day, I just drive home. I don't hang around anywhere else. I just go home and have a shower, and even if it's 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, me and the cat get into bed because my wife is just not with me. Half of my life is gone. Gentlemen, does your wife know that she is the most important person in your life? Or is she just an add-on? Someone to make your life more comfortable, to cook for you, to do your washing, your ironing, clean the house. If your wife doesn't know that she is, in actual fact, the number one person in your life, then she will not experience that closeness. Am I right, ladies? Is this important? I can see some ladies just, with her eyes, not wanting to show too much. The second one is openness. So we're spelling out couples. The first one is closeness. Now it is openness. She wants you to open up to her. And this is where so many men feel trapped, because she wants you to talk to her. What do I talk to my wife about? What do I say? Women are expressive, responsive. She wants to talk about things. What you've missed because you didn't come to Camp Somerset was a whole presentation of the difference between male and female, the way that we communicate, the way that we resolve problems. When there's a problem that I need to work through, when there's a problem in the church, I don't talk to anyone. If there's things that my wife needs to hear about, I go in utter silence and work it out in my head. It's only once I have come up with a solution that I will inform her as part of the church board. She's on my board as well. And she often, when the elder would come and visit, she'll come and sit in and she'll say, now I'm going to hear some news that I normally don't hear. Not that she's a gossiper, but she recognizes that my male way of resolving things is completely different to the way that she resolves things. Because the way that females normally want to try to resolve things is by talking through it. Right, ladies? And it is as you talk through things that you actually come up to solutions. By that time, most men had already fallen into the trap, because the moment that their wives start to talk about problems, we as males go into fixing mode. We just moved into a new district where the conference asked me to plant a new church. And my wife, who's a registered nurse, got a job at the local hospital, not realizing that that hospital, the emergency department, was known for their bullying of new staff. So she would come home and she would be in tears and she would talk to me about what she's experienced during the day. The hospital would take no steps until one of the newly appointed staff attempted suicide. But typically male, typically therapist, she would come with her problems, and after she would share problems, I will sit her down and say, right, here's the steps that you need to take. Tomorrow morning when you get to work, step number 1, step number 2, step number 3. Do you understand those steps that you need to take? Yes, she understands it. So she goes the following morning to work, and she comes back that evening in tears. And I would sit her down and say, right, did you do step number 1? No. What about step number 2? No. Step number 3? No. I go through the whole process of re-emphasizing the reasons why she needs to take those steps. By day 3, she still has not done anything about those 3 steps. And by this time, I get so frustrated, I say, you know what? Other people will pay for my advice. You get it for free, and you do not even want to act on it. To which she says, gentlemen, I never asked you for advice. I just asked you to listen. What if we actually ask our wives this question when they come up with issues? Would you like my ears or would you like my mouth? Would you like me to just listen and respond with clarifying questions, or would you like me to give you advice? And when she says, all I want is your ears, friends, my suggestion is that you're very attentive. Not by looking on your phone while she's talking, not by watching the rugby on the screen, but put all devices to one side. Give her your full attention and ask clarifying questions as she speaks. In doing so, you will actually make a huge investment in your marriage. Now, something I want just for, because I'm talking to men, women are expressive, responsive. They are wired in series. Talking now technical language, leaving the wives maybe a little bit to one side. Well, Maybe I shouldn't say that. So gentlemen, help me with this. If in that circuit, one bulb is blown, what happens to the other? Nothing works. Have you noticed that you do all the right stuff? You even take time off from work, and you want to create a romantic evening. And so you've gone and, the laundry has been heaping up, and you go home and you do all the laundry. You take the washing off the lines, you even wash it. You clean the house, you cook a meal, you set the table with beautiful red roses as well as candles. She comes home, she says, wow, high time that you start carrying the load in this home as well. And you say one negative word after that it is gone with Doris Day, with any romantic evening happening that night. Have you noticed it? Because of the way that she's been wired. We as males are wired differently. We are in actual fact wired compartmentalized in a parallel circuit. If she blows one of those fuses, what happens? You still provide, you still protect, you still maintain, going to work to bring money in for the family. I would suggest that men be very quiet, it might backfire. But this is the truth, ladies and gentlemen. This is how God made us differently. And ladies, keep this in mind when I later talk to you about your husband's deep desire for conquering. And I'm not talking from a feministic perspective, a negative form of conquering, but rather a need to provide and to protect for you and for the kids, and to create a home. Continuing, you can blow as many fuses in him as what you can, but he still maintains certain key roles. He doesn't step away from it. Well, if I blow a fuse in my wife, what happens? Everything shuts down. Everything. She wants to go back to her mum, not realizing that her mum is already buried for 9 years. She's an integrated personality. Body, mind, and spirit is interconnected. One unkind act, one unkind word can shut her whole system down. Am I right, ladies? They're not so responsive as at Camp Somerset. I don't know what's happening here. There must be some more danger in church. Are we filming it? That's maybe the reason why. Okay, so let's go to the next one, understanding. Gentlemen, your wife wants you to understand, to live in an understanding way. Don't try to fix her. Just listen. We've spoken about that. It says in 1 Peter 3 verse 7, likewise your husband should live with your wives in understanding. My father said to me just before I got married, he said, son, don't ever try to understand your wife. Just love her. Showing honor to the weaker female sex. Wow, that is horrible, especially if you read that. Feminists will say, see, it's a male writing it. Hang on, let's interpret what Peter is trying to say. Peter, by the way, was a married guy. Showing honor to the weaker female sex, since we are joint heirs of the gift of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. Be careful, the way that you respond to your wife could hinder your prayers, is the implication here. Bible does not demand that I understand my wife, but that I desire to live in an understanding way with her. Recognizing that God actually created her differently to the way that He has created us. Friends, the Bible talks about relationships between a husband and a wife, which is complementary, not the same. Not the same. And I hope that you heard what I said last night, and I hope that you hear and listen between the lines what I'm saying. God's design is the connection of two complementary, not two of the same. And it is that complementary that in actual fact brings us to the creation in the image of God. It's interesting that God in the triunity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, out of love creates man in His likeness and His image, creating us in a relationship, husband and wife in a relationship with God. And because of that triangular love relationship, He gives us something that He never gave to angels. And that is the ability to create life. But creation of life can only happen in a complementary relationship, not the same. And therefore God actually, in the way that wives think versus how males think, the way that males resolve problems versus the way that females resolve problems, the difference in the way that husbands connect after a day apart versus how females connect a day after they've been apart is completely different to the other. And God is desiring that each one of us actually take the time to live in an understanding way to that difference and honor it, because that is created by God. I'm so glad that my wife doesn't look like me. I'm so glad that my wife doesn't think the way that I think. In a small church, I took a church over with only 3 members and starting to grow it. My wife is part of my most important team that actually helped that church to grow. And there are times that I just appreciate in a board meeting that I share a point and my wife says, well, I think I've got another idea. And she challenges me sometimes in a kind way. And I appreciate that, because I never want on my church board people that are like-minded thinking like me, because that would make it very boring. Your wife is vulnerable, is the weaker sex in 2 areas. Number 1, where you say things such as, I just don't understand you. I wonder if it's worth it to try. If you make those statements, friends, you have in actual fact blown the bulb, and she shuts down. She's further more vulnerable when you dishonor her by treating her as less than equal. The truth is, you are both joint heirs of the gift of life. God has in actual fact placed you as equals in the marital relationship, but with different roles and different responsibilities. Gentlemen, are you still on track with me? Still awake? Ladies, are we still speaking your language? Okay, let's go on. By the way, by nodding your head, remember I'm going to get the males just now to respond when I talk to you. And it's going to be interesting. The 4th year is to be a peacemaker. She wants you to say, I'm sorry. 1 Corinthians 7 verse 28 says, but even if you do marry, you have not sinned. Nevertheless, such will have trouble in the flesh. Did you ever read that text before you got married? That there will be trouble if you get married? I can confess to that. At times of conflict, it is never a good idea for a husband to say, let's just drop it. When we try to drop it and just move on, she will become historical. Historical, not hysterical, but historical. Why does she become historical? Because she actually can't drop it. She wants, God has created in her a deep-seated desire for the issues that form barriers between the two of you to work it through. So she will go back and she will bring up things of the past so that the two of you can work through those issues towards a common solution where the two of you can have closeness. That is God's design. As you stood in front of the pulpit the day that you got married, you were thinking, gentlemen, about honeymoon coming up. And she was thinking about how to make you a better man. Because she believed, like your mother-in-law, that you actually could become something better. And she was already designing it, putting it in place. She believes in you and therefore wants you to work with her to resolve issues. She wants to reconcile with you. She's trying to encourage understanding, openness, and peace. That is what she's trying to do. The path to peace is plain. You must simply say, I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? The issue is not who is right, who is wrong. The issue is really love and respect, friends. Too often, two loving people that believed that they were going to be the first marriage without problems because they have met the right person. All of us think that when we start off, right? But very soon after honeymoon, after we've so often touched that, that beautiful paper of wrapping of honeymoon, it starts to wear through, and the rocks and all the problems starts to come out, all the differences, and suddenly two people that thought that they loved each other stand at other ends and start to fight as if they're enemies. If only they would realize that it shouldn't be that way. I so often in marital therapy would sit down with a couple and I would allow them to each for their own 15 or 20 minutes just vomit all the stuff, all the historical stuff on my desk. He said, she said, and they just blame each other. And I listened to both parties and eventually I stopped them and I say to them, guys, just wait a moment. I just want to scrape all the vomit off my desk so that I can at least see you because it's become a massive heap. Tell me, what is your commitment to this relationship? Write it down for me on a piece of paper. What they don't realize, I give them each a different color pen. And they write it down. And they fold it close, give it in to me, and I look at it and I turn it around. And both has a very high commitment percentage. It's phenomenal for them to see that their spouse, which they thought are not committed in the relationship, is in actual fact giving a 90 or 80%. I can even work with a 50%. And I asked them to get up from their chairs. And I turned the chairs towards each other so that when they sit down, their kneecaps is touching each other. And I say, right, what I now want you to do is to put your elbows on your legs, holding each other's hand. What happens to their faces? As the kneecaps touch each other, their faces are right against each other. I say, right now, without leaving each other's hands, I want you now to fight. Say what you've just shared with me. Suddenly they can't. They're too close. too close to fight. And that's the problem. We need distance between ourselves and our spouse before we can fight. When we're close in proximity, we can't do it. And it's then that I start to work with them, because the desire is in actual fact still there to have closeness. What would happen if I actually discover that my spouse sits on exactly the same side as what I'm sitting, have exactly the same desires of having a happy marriage? We just do not take the time to decipher the other person's words. So let's check to see whether, gentlemen, you listened this morning. When I feel unloved, unappreciated, uncared, no, let's turn it around. When my spouse feels unloved, uncared for, unappreciated, what are the three options how they would react? Fight, flight, or the combination. What would happen if you actually use that, and when you see your spouse withdrawing or attacking, instead of responding to their behavior, you rather actually respond to the real underlying cause? What is the cause? They feel unloved, uncared for, unappreciated. What would happen instead, in that fight mode or that flight mode, you would in actual fact put your arms around them and say, you are too important for me. This relationship is too important for me to fight. I'm so sorry where I've hurt you. Would you mind if we just take a few moments just to regain our focus and reconnect, because I truly want to hear how you feel inside. Ladies, would that bring about a different result? Whew, Song of Solomon is really big here. Let's rather start at the top. She further wants loyalty. She needs to know you're committed. When your wife asks, do you love me? Will you love me when I'm old and grey and wrinkled? Forget that I said that. When I'm an invalid, when I have Alzheimer's. She's not asking for information. She's asking for assurance. Think about that for a moment, in the way that we normally respond. If you respond to that, then she will ask, but why? Why do you love me? Why will you continue to be with me when I've got Alzheimer's? What is it that you love me about me? It's then that many husbands feel trapped in being set up. Gentlemen, she's actually drawing this out of you because reassurance of your love for her actually energizes her. Gives her certainty, the assurance. She's a one-man woman. The question is, what are you? We live today in a swimsuit world. Wherever we walk in the shopping centers, shopping malls, we see half-naked women displayed on advertising boards. And as you walk with your wife there, where's your eyes? I'm just going to say it honestly, friends. I've come to the point where I don't. Song of Solomon, chapter 8, verse 6 says, close your eyes to every love but mine. Hold no one in your arms but me. What do you see on that screen? Do you think that your wife doesn't notice the glance? What does that glance say to her? Watch here for Michelle Obama as she watches her husband as he laughs and chats to the other women on his side. It is Job that wrote the following. He says, I've made a covenant with my eyes. Why then should I look upon a young woman? Gentlemen, if you want happiness in your marriage, if you want your wife to be responsive to you, you need to make a commitment with your eyes. And one of the biggest challenges today, friends, is pornography. Young boys are accessing pornography from the age of 8 to 11, their first encounter with pornography. And it stays with them. And in the therapy room, I work with men and women. It's normally the female that asks for help, that is unable to perform the marital act if the TV screen is not playing pornography. In one case, the gentleman will actually want to physically vomit if his wife wants to be intimate with him physically if there's no pornography playing on the screen. What a heck of a turn on that must be for the wife, right? And it's decimating. It's decimating our marriages. It's decimating, destroying our spiritual life in our churches. It rewires and alters the brain of young men in exactly the same way as what cocaine rewires the brain. The sad thing today is that it's not anymore just now young males, but also females that are starting to access it. And marriages are destroyed because of it. The last one there is esteem. She wants you to honor and cherish her. The best way to honor and respect a wife is through your closeness. It is through your openness. It is through your understanding. It is through your peacemaking, your loyalty, and now the esteem that you show her. Proverbs 31, verse 28 to 29, her children stand up and call her blessed. Her husband also rises up and he praises her. He says, many women do excellent things, but you are better than all the others. Use symbols to show your wife esteem. Do you remember the birthdays, the anniversary? Do you still, gentlemen, go and pick a flower just to put it on a windscreen? You don't need to buy a whole bunch of, when I think we celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary, I bought 25 long stem roses. My son came to visit us. He had his ring-tailed possum that he rescued, and not realizing, I just put down the bunch of red roses and that possum just dived. I never knew that possums were actually love roses. Just dived into that bush of expensive roses. It's interesting, my wife's words, she said, it's not those roses that count. The fact that you've brought it is nice, but it is the closeness, the intentionalness with which you are trying to work on our relationship that speaks volumes. Ladies, am I still on track? Does your wife expect you to read her mind? Or is it a trap? Your wife knows whether you are present or not. You can sit in the same room with her and she knows whether you are with her or not. And so many men, so many Christian men come home every night, sleep on the same bed. But in actual fact, their emotion, their affection is somewhere else. I worked in a marriage with a couple where for 5 years, husband and wife slept on the same bed, but the husband never touched his wife. She eventually had an affair. And guess who the church places under censorship? The wife. I think the husband also needs to be placed under censorship. Gentlemen, there is the formula. There's the formula of spelling a love to your wife. If you would be intentional in that, and I noticed that quite a few ladies were taking photos as I spoke. I hope you're going to give it to your husband and delete it from your phone. I didn't see men. Was there men taking photos? I'm not sure whether they've, or maybe you'll take the recording afterwards. But there, in a nutshell, is a brief formula. If you would pray over this and be intentional in doing it, you will in actual fact find that your wife will want to be close to you, will want to respond in terms of intimacy towards you from a male perspective. And you will find that as you commit to God and does it in spite of what she does, that something will change within her. Many wives that refuse to react has in actual fact been so injured, either by a father or by a previous relationship or in the current relationship, that they do not believe that there is potential for a happy relationship. They stay there for the kids' sake, but it's a horrible relationship. Gentlemen, I challenge you to actually commit to God, commit to your marriage, and do it not because she does it, but do it because that is what God is asking you to do. So I'm going to switch over now to the females, to the ladies. Is that okay? You still awake? Gentlemen, you may respond when I ask whether I'm speaking the truth. Other than that, don't peep a word. As I said, as I presented this at a number of occasions, I've seen the emotions in men, because this is the most misunderstood aspect of relationship, because we as a church has neglected to actually define what it is. How does a male understand that they are loved? My mother didn't understand it. My mother did not understand how to speak respect. And I could see it in the relationship that she had with my father, and even in the relationship that she had with us as sons. So talking to the females from a male perspective, the Bible says here, again the preamble, I'm not going to go through it, but then he says this dreaded text that most men quote and most women hate. I was invited to take a wedding for a young couple, and I asked them, I said, what text would you like me to preach on for your wedding sermon? And it was without a blink that the young bride said, you can speak on any text in the Bible except that one that says, wives, submit to your husbands. The reason for that is because we don't understand the meaning of it. So here it goes. He says, wives, submit. If you've got a King James translation, you will actually notice that the King James is closer to the original Greek than the New King James that I'm quoting here from. Because the King James says, wives, submit yourselves. The word hupotasso, that is there translated as to submit, actually is a military word where a soldier chooses not commanded, but chooses themselves to place them under the command of another in order for them to reach the end goal together. And ladies, I want to suggest to you that that is the way that God has designed you. Your greatest desire is to have the best for your marriage. And God has given you the intuition to be able to do that. But the danger is in doing it, you stand the chance of damaging your husband. And therefore, in verse 33 of that same chapter, he says, nevertheless, that the wife see that she respects. The Greek word translated as respect actually is phobeo, where the English word phobia comes from. Does it mean that she therefore needs to be afraid of her husband? Or does it mean that she needs to be afraid of injuring her husband? I would want to suggest, ladies, because the church has never spoken to wives on this issue, on how to show respect to their husbands, that a lot of injury has taken place and many men have withdrawn from not just their marital relationship, but also from out of the church. Many boys are never shown respect from a male perspective, biblical perspective, and therefore young boys have never risen to become true men of leadership and protection in the home as well as in the church. We jokingly say that the husband is the head of the home, but the wife is the neck. She has the power and the ability to turn the head in whichever direction she wants. And in so many marriages that happens. And as I speak on this topic, I sometimes make enemies with the wives that wants to follow a more political route, and they just don't like what I say. But what's interesting is to observe how the men respond. Where so many men, either the emotion starts to flow, grown strong men crying, weeping, and afterwards saying to me, for the first time someone had put it in words, that which I so desperately feel deep inside. Utter loneliness, feeling that I just have to just forget about my needs and just trod following my wife. That's never been God's desire. God has in actual fact made husband and wife to stand together through the trials of life. That word phobia. I've spent 2 years in military service. Our country was at war, spent time in the war zone. Spent 15 years after that in military camps as part of national service. 3 months, 1 month, 3 months, 1 month at a time each year. And I've seen grown men, strong men that are able to hold their own against other men, been diminished to nothing by a short, tiny little wife that with few short, cutting words was able to reduce him to nothing. He still maintains to provide. He still maintains to protect his family. But he has withdrawn, or he fights, feeling unloved, unappreciated, uncared for. What would happen if the wife actually will make a commitment to God and say, Lord, I want to follow your design, not the worldly design. I want to follow your design. I want to choose, not be demanded, but I want to choose to submit, to come under the command structure in order, because you've given me a power far beyond my size, to be able to guide my family to a happy outcome that will be a sweet-smelling aroma to God's honor and glory. Ladies, I've grown up in a society where respect needs to be earned. Right? I think most of you have grown up in that same kind of society. So reason with me here this afternoon. If husbands are commanded to love his wife, right? There's no question about that. It's a male's responsibility to love his wife. And the husband is also responsible for maintaining a relationship so that his wife now can show respect back to him, which he understands as being love, she loving him. We make him responsible not only for the love that he gives his wife, but we also make him responsible for the love that she's going to give back to him. Did you get that? Must I say it again? If respect in the marital context needs to be earned by the husband, then we make him responsible for the love that he has to show his wife, but we also make him responsible for the love that she will have to show back to him. He has to earn it. And that is not fair. The reality is that if respect is the way that a husband understands that his wife loves him, if that is the language that he understands that she loves him, then the command to the husband to love her husband is then equally true for the wife, a command for the wife to respect her husband no matter how he's acting, because of her commitment to God. And what will happen if that actually will take place? The question in every female mind right now is, how does that respect look like? And that's a fair question. The formula for wives to respect their husbands is spelled chairs. It is conquest, hierarchy, authority, insight, relationship, and sexuality. Now, right there are a number of ways in which you can, from a political perspective, say conquest, hierarchy, authority. Hang on, put your seatbelt on. Listen me out first. Is that okay? Let's look at the Bible. Let's do a respect test. I'm not going to read it there. The Bible speaks quite a bit about respect. By the way, both male and female needs respect. Both male and female needs love. No question about it. But primarily, the husband understands that his wife loves him primarily when she demonstrates respect towards him. Right? So keep that in mind. How do I do the test? Go and tonight and think a little bit about things that you actually respect about your husband. Things that he do that you actually respect him. And then in a quiet moment in the home, go up to him and say to him, hubby, look, I've been thinking about you and me. I've been thinking about you in particular. And I just wanted to let you know that there's quite a number of things that I really respect you for. Before going any further, make an excuse to exit the room and watch what he does. I'm pretty sure he's going to come running after you and say, hang on, not so fast. What is that you say that you respect me about? Tell me about that. I've already shared this morning that I believed as a teenager that I didn't amount to much, that I held no worth, no value. And because of the pathology in which I grew up, my schooling was impacted. And I believed that I was the dummy in my family. It was years later, as I was doing my master's degree, close to the end, that I received 2 envelopes from the university. Didn't expect anything, because every term that I signed up for a new subject, I believed that I was going to fail. I received two large envelopes about a month apart. I'm sharing this to make a point. As I opened up the first one, it actually had a letter from the Chancellor of the University of Canberra that said, "Dear Mr. Haupt, congratulations. The university is honoured to confer upon you a lifelong membership to the International High Achievers Golden Key High Achievers Award." Let me explain, it continues, what does this mean? It means that you fall in the top 15% of academical achievers in over, can't remember how many universities worldwide. A month later, I received awards from the Dean's Excellence Award. I phoned my mum. My dad had already passed by this time, and I phoned my mum that Sunday. I said, "Mum, you remember the nights that you sat up till midnight trying to teach me English and maths?" She said, "Just thinking about it makes me tired again." I said, "Mum, before you get too tired, I'm just phoning to say thank you again." She said, "What made you think about this after so many years since you've left school?" I said, "Mum, I've received these 2 envelopes in the mail," and I shared with her. There was a split-second silence between when I stopped speaking and before she spoke. But when she spoke, she said the following words, "Son, let me tell you about your older brother's success in business." Not a single word about the achievement, nothing. My wife, on the other hand, I knew that she wanted a childhood experience back again. We were living outside of Canberra. I was working in the conference office there at a 12-acre property. And her sister from England came to visit, and she was going to take her sister back to Sydney Airport. I knew from our home to the airport was about 3 hours drive. 3 hours back, there's about 2 hours that she will spend at the airport seeing her sister off. So I had about 8 hours to play. Her childhood experience, she grew up with chickens, and she so desperately wanted little chicks again. So I had bought, in the previous few weeks, I had bought the material that was needed. When she was at home, I'd measured out the size of the chook pen. And the moment early morning when my wife driving at the red tail lights disappeared over the hill, I jumped out. The sun was just ready to come up. I had the auger, I had everything. I started to drill the holes. I had quick set concrete. I started to plant the poles. And 8 hours later, I saw the lights coming into our driveway, and I had just put away the last equipment. There stood a structure, protected against the foxes and all, a structure that was not there when she left 8 hours before. She drove up to the structure with the vehicle lights shining on it. She stopped, got out. She walked around this. She said, "What is this?" I said, "It's your chook pen. Your first chooks are on their way. Hope to pick them up tomorrow." She took me in her arms and she gave me a bear hug, and she just held me tight. And she said the following words. She said, "I am so glad that I've married a man that is not shot through his hands." I lived on cloud number 9 for 3 weeks. What was the difference between my mum's comment versus my wife's comment? my wife actually spoke respect into me. She recognized something that I did well, and she spoke that respect for me. And it had a phenomenal impact for me emotionally. So, ladies, I'm just giving you some examples there. So let's look at what respect spells. It's chairs. The first one is conquest. Appreciated desire to work and to achieve, not to conquer you, but rather conquest is the natural inborn desire of the man to go out and conquer the challenges of his world, to work and to achieve for his family. Yes, in understanding how important his work is, you will in actual fact go a very far way of speaking respect into your husband. Does your husband therefore not need your love? How does he does, but the way that you spell love is through respect. My wife has many choices. We've come into this country as immigrants. We came into this country with nothing other than a suitcase each in our hand. In my work in the church in South Africa, I planted a new church every second year of my ministry there. I traveled far beyond what the conference was paying me for. And my wife had to work in order to keep our budget afloat. So by the time that we came over to this country, we had nothing to show other than invest whatever we had into immigration and into flights to Australia. We had to start all over again. Nothing more. For my wife, who has now retired, that is an option for her. The only option for me is either go to work or go to jail. It is so inborn, the need in my psyche to provide for my family, to be there, to protect for my family. It has nothing to do with conquering her or a political demonstration. God has in actual fact implanted into your husband's heart a desire to actually conquer the world in providing for you and for your family. One of the best ways to show respect to him is to recognize that. To actually take him in your arms and say, honey, you know what? Or whatever you call him. I'm so glad that I'm married to you. I can see how you work hard. It is not the size of the paycheck that is the important part, but the fact that he responds to that calling with which God has called him. And by recognizing that, will in actual fact bring respect to him. Gentlemen, am I right with that? It's a bit more response here than with the females. He wants you to believe in him. He wants your admiration. I can be the most lousiest preacher, but you know what? It is what my wife says after a sermon that really matters. And if I preach, go over my time, and she says, come on, hurry up, man. But she listens to another preacher for 2 hours with no problem. It's a sensitive point. Am I right, Pastor Zeni? True. Let's go to the next one, hierarchy. Appreciate the desire to protect and to provide. Hierarchy, the natural desire to protect and to provide for his wife and his family, and if necessary, to die for them. It's very interesting looking here at Ephesians 5, verse 22 to 26. I'm not going to read the whole thing, read the underlined area. For a husband is the head of his wife. In what way? He is the head in the responsibility that God has given them, the responsibility to provide and to be willing to lay down his life for his family. It's very interesting. So often when we go unprepared into an area and a cold snap comes in, that my wife or my grandkids, or when my kids were small, would stand there shivering, and I would be freezing cold myself, but I would unbutton my shirt and wrap it around my wife, or take my jacket and put it around my wife or my kids, and she would say, "Don't do that, you're cold as well." Suddenly I don't feel the cold, as I take my protection and place it around them. There's something that God has designed. There are many ways to show respect to your husband, but look at the ways of appreciate his desire to protect and to provide, especially when things aren't going well. We arrived in Australia. We had already applied for our immigration here, and the only conference that offered us a job was the Greater Sydney Conference in Sydney. But they had to apply for visas, and they didn't ask enough questions. They applied for the same. We could not work. And the little bit of money that was left, we were going 4 times faster through our South African rand. And every time that you spend $1, there was 4 Australian rands gone. Those years, nowadays it is, I think, over 10. But I remember that they illegally, I shouldn't say this illegally, but it was illegal, doing handyman's job, renovating there in Crosslands, the ranger's house. I built my own house in South Africa, so I knew a little bit about building. And it came to the Thursday, long weekend, and the rangers had forgotten. They'd gone away for the long weekend, leaving me in charge, and they forgot to give me my cash in hand. We had not a single cent in the bank left, not a single slice of bread in the house. We had to face the weekend with no food. And I wrestled with God. Cut a long story short, at the bottom of the Hawkesbury River, there was a piece of paper that drew my attention. And I fished that piece of paper out. It was a $5 note. I'd applied for a job. It was 3 months waiting to know whether I got the job or not. I took that $5. On my way home, I bought a loaf of bread, a liter of milk. Those days you could still buy that with $5. And I handed it to my family. I said, "This is what we have for the weekend." My wife said, "Come eat with us." I said, "No, I don't want to eat." Following morning, early Friday morning, public holiday. I fled to go and work, although it was public holiday, because I just could not face my family knowing that I had failed to provide for them. Early that morning, the phone rang. I answered it. It was the director of the department which I had applied for a job for. He said, "I knew we would find you there. The committee sat last night. They've observed how you was working under difficult circumstances, your faithfulness. And although someone with a doctoral degree had also applied for the same job, the committee had decided to appoint you." The treasurer came after the meeting and said, "I've got David's first salary in advance, cash in hand. He might need it now." The director said, "Can I bring it for you?" God intervened at the right time. But friends, that story illustrates, ladies, the deep desire in the male's heart to provide for his family. Speaking that and honoring him for that will actually speak respect. The next one is authority. Appreciate his desire to serve and to lead. Women often say to me, "I want him to be the head. I want him to be the leader. I just want to make sure that he makes the decisions in keeping with what I want." Is that respect? The question, therefore, is who should be the boss in the home? Is there a boss in your home? It's a trick question, friends. Because in so many marriages, there is a fight over who is the boss. There's sometimes departmental bosses in Christian marriages because the one are more gifted in certain areas. Authority must come with responsibility. Ultimately, God keeps the husband responsible for the protection and the provision of his family. Appreciating and respecting your husband's desire to serve you and to lead the family takes faith. Especially if your husband did not grow up in a home where family worship was kept. And now your initial intent was, well, you're not doing it, so I have to become the priest in the home. The more you do it, the less he will do it. Until you actually place confidence and faith in him and help him, co-share it. Appreciating and respecting your husband's desire to serve you and lead the family takes faith, courage, and strength on your part. But ultimately, doing so is trusting God's design. Let me check. Gentlemen, am I still on track? I am. Thank you. The next one is insight. Appreciate the desire to analyze and counsel. A wife writes to Dr. Emerson and says, I have longed for a relational intimacy in my marriage for 23 years. Little did I know that my lack of respect was sabotaging that desire. I had serious arrogance problems, thinking my ways were right and not acknowledging his ideas as worthy of consideration. It was quite amazing once the Lord nailed me, without me spouting my opinion and giving him room to declare, to share his. Amazing things began to occur. He began to reveal his heart. We actually have conversations rather than monologues. My love and respect for him skyrocketed. In return, he's begun to blossom into the man I always hoped he would be. A marriage needs her intuition and his insight. And for the fact that males ladies are far more reserved in speaking. By the way, your husband has half the vocabulary than what you have. 50% less vocabulary. I'm talking general terms. By asking him respectfully to share his thoughts about your future, what his desires is, and listening to it without shooting it down. If you don't agree with him, let 24 hours go by and say to him, you know what, I've been thinking about a discussion last night, and there's a few thoughts that I would like to just throw in and wonder what your thoughts are on that. Give him that sense that he will come to the realization that you've actually weighed up some of the comments that he has made, some of the thoughts. Something that just in my mind right now, just because of the busyness of my program and so often being away, my wife now permanently at home, my wife suffered a heart attack a few months ago and therefore had to resign from her work and go on to retirement. She's half the size that I am. They've discovered certain problems with her heart. There's heart problems in the family. And I knew that whippersnipping around the house, I had in actual fact cut a hole in the downpipe, a rainwater downpipe. And my wife drew my attention. I already knew it and I had already plans to fix it. But I came home after a trip away doing work for the conference, and I went with everything to go and fix it, and discovered it's already fixed. Gentlemen, how do we feel when we discover that, someone else had fixed it? The stuff that we know, it's already been fixed. I appreciate it, but there's a part of me that just doesn't feel too nice about it. She's paid someone to go and fix it. Relationship is the next one. Appreciated desire for shoulder-to-shoulder friendship. Question, building relationship, talking, or just being together? Which is which? A wife eventually went with her husband in America to go and do duck hunting. It was in the middle of winter. They sat there on the frozen pond in a little makeshift little structure that the ducks wouldn't see them. No ducks landed on the water. No shot was shot off. And as they trekked their few kilometers through frozen mud, the husband, by the way, it was utter silence the entire time, because a single word could actually scare ducks that might be flying over or be in the vicinity, would scare them away. So hours sitting there in the freezing cold on the frozen pond, as they were trekking through the frozen mud, the husband gave his wife a bear slap on the back and said, "This was the most fantastic day of my life." And she thought to herself, "What? I couldn't even talk. What was so fantastic about this?" It's interesting that when we as males come together, ladies, there's not a lot of words being said, but we do things together. When I go up to Pastor Zenny, and I say to him, "Pastor Zenny, my car's giving a bit of problems." He knows immediately by just saying that I'm asking for help. And if he has some technical skills, we'll be very soon in the hood of that car with our armpits full of grease, scratching around, saying nothing or hardly anything. But what we are doing is we are building relationship. Ladies, your husband asked you just to come and sit with him. Don't mess it up by wanting to talk. Because when he's asking you to sit with him and just be with him where he is working, and you know that there's a ton of stuff at home that still needs to be done, what your husband have just asked you for is to work on the relationship from a male perspective. He's genuine with that. He wants closeness. He wants actually the two of you to draw close from a male perspective. This is what this lady writes. She says, "I knew exactly what you were talking about when you spoke about shoulder to shoulder. My husband just finally came out and told me that sometimes all he wants me to do was just sit with him. He's accepted the fact that there are times when I will be correcting papers as I sit." She's a teacher and work is never done. "And I've learned that if I'm getting up to check the laundry or do something else, all I have to do is tell him, as long as he knows what I'm doing and that I will be back, it's okay." You look at the families that actually stick together. Those hillbillies that actually stick together, where those cars on Sundays stand there with the bonnet open and, the one side of the car all jacked up and the guy underneath. Where's the girl with her curlers sitting there on a turned upside down drum, sitting there just watching as he's working? She knows how to speak respect to her husband. Am I right, gentlemen? Here's the devil in the bed. Let's take it, shall we? sexuality. Appreciate his desire for sexual intimacy. He wants her to respond to him sexually. She wants emotional release first. Talk face to face, in other words. After all, that's what love was all about, wasn't it? In my normal slides, I would stop there and you wouldn't be able to read further. I can see these wives. Their eyes are so trained on the screen. What is coming up next? Because this is where the devil is in the bed, friends. Number one, they release that to two keys to understand your husband. Realize that his sexuality is much different from yours. Listen to what Proverbs says in Proverbs 5 verse 19. A loving doe, a graceful deer, may a breast satisfy you always. May you ever be intoxicated with her love. A man is, in actual fact, visually orientated. My wife steps out of the shower after 40 years of married life, and I say, stop, let me look. I step out of the shower, and she says, look at the mess of water that you put all over the floor. Men are visually orientated, differently to females. What is the problem with pornography today is that the first exposure to intimacy or images of intimacy is that from a male perspective, friends, they imprint that is how they're going to measure their future relationship with their spouse against that first encounter or exposure. Female is orientated or imprinted from an emotional perspective. And when she actually gives herself to a guy outside of the permanency of a marital relationship, it hardly ever is satisfying. But what happens later in life is that she will, in actual fact, measure her marital intimacy against what she had. And she will have a negative connotation to intimacy. I see it time and again. I'm currently working with a couple where the wife was sexually abused from the age of 5 and have been sexually abused just under 100 times. I'm not going to say the figure, but close to 100 times by 3 people very close to her in a family. My mind just boggled that grandparents, fathers, and uncles can do that. Whenever the husband wants intimacy, whenever there is struggle in their relationship, how they resolve conflict in their marriage is by jumping into bed. It never is satisfying, no matter what happens there, because she every time experiences a sense of being used. Gentlemen, that is why creating an environment of closeness, intimacy, from an emotional perspective for your wife is so important. But ladies, on the other side, it is vital to recognize that you're married to a husband that has other desires. And therefore, appreciate your husband's sexual desire for you. He needs sexual release as much as you need emotional release. In other words, intimacy. 1 Corinthians 7 verse 5 says, do not deprive each other except perhaps by mutual consent. And here I want to stop. The mutual consent or the deprivation, husbands, don't deprive your wives from the emotional intimacy. We tend to only expect that the wife shouldn't deprive us from the physical intimacy. There's a need for both sides. He says, then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. both husband and wife needs to fulfill their duty, not to deprive. Remember this, he needs sexual release as you need, ladies, emotional release. As a woman, you may feel that the two of you have to feel and be close to each other to share sexually. He, on the other hand, feels that the two of you need to be physically close together in order to give emotional intimacy. So who's going to win? Who's going to give in? He or she who is the maturest in the relationship. That will put you a bit of pressure on both sexes. If I have in actual fact made God the source of my commitment, and I realize that God has made my spouse in a certain way that is different to the way He has created me, my desire is, therefore, to fulfill in my spouse's way of understanding that I love or that I respect. And I would like to suggest to you, ladies, that a dose of respect works far more effective than a dose of Viagra. That is all from me for this weekend, Pastor Zenny. I wonder whether there is any questions. I should have handed out pieces of paper because people could ask questions, because sometimes these topics are just too threatening. But is there anyone that would like to put up their hand and maybe take the challenge to ask a question?